Hey guys, so the most common question we get in the comments here at TFL Off-Road is why are side-by-sides so expensive now? And it is true, some of these units can cost up to $30,000. Now the most common argument we hear is, well, for that money, I'm just gonna go buy a Jeep. And I do have an answer for those people, but first, to kind of better understand where we were and where we are now, let's look at a little bit of side-by-side history. So for a good example of just how much side-by-sides have changed, let's take a look at the Polaris RZR lineup. So the very first RZR S model came out in 2009. Now that model packed 12 inches of suspension travel, it ran 26-inch tires, and packed about 55 horsepower. Now when it was released in 2009, the first RZR S sold for $13,999 in the US. Now even at the time in 2009, people were saying $14,000, that's crazy for a side-by-side, but at that time, nothing came close to the performance of the RZR S. Now fast forward just 5 years to the Polaris RZR XP1000. Now power was up to 110 horsepower, a pretty big jump over 75, but what really made a difference is the suspension. Travel on that model was 16 inches in the front and 18 inches in the rear. As for the tires, the units on that 2014 XP1000 were 29 inches. Of course, all of this performance comes at a price, and the 2014 RZR XP1000 was one of the first side-by-sides to hit the $20,000 mark. And now here comes the truly crazy leap. Now today's Polaris RZR Turbo S has 16 inches of ground clearance. It has 25 inches of suspension travel. And for power, the turbo engine puts out 168 horses, turning 32-inch tires. Now all of those numbers are significantly better than what Polaris offered back in 2009 and much better than what they offered just 4 years ago in 2014. But of course, all of that capability comes at a price. The Polaris RZR Turbo S in the States starts at $27,000 for the 2-seat model, where up here in Canada, it sells for $34,000. So that initial 2009 RZR S model, the price has doubled since then, but the performance has more than doubled. And I think the one thing you have to remember is, as you add things like bigger tires and more powerful engines, every single piece of the driveline needs to be updated to accommodate for that. So it's not like you can just throw bigger tires on and call it a day. That requires bigger axles and different transmission tuning, and of course all of these things cost more money. So when you look at it that way, that performance has doubled, it's not a huge surprise to see that the price has doubled as well. But now let's tackle the big question, why am I gonna get a side-by-side over a Jeep, and are side-by-sides really worth the money? I think the hardest thing to get over when talking about Jeep versus side-by-side is the fact that you can spend tons of money on a vehicle that is not street legal. If you go buy a Jeep, you're getting something that you can go out and have fun with, hit the trails with, but then still drive it home. Spending 30 grand on a side-by-side means you have a machine which can only drive off-road, you have to trailer it to the trailhead, or you have to live somewhere where you can ride, and that's just a lot of money for something that can't be driven down the road. And I do totally understand that argument. For a lot of people, you'll never get past that point. But you absolutely cannot compare the performance of a Jeep to the performance of today's side-by-sides. The RZR Turbo S, as I mentioned, has 25 inches of suspension travel. Something like the Can-Am Maverick X3, it has over 20 inches of suspension travel. Now, that means that these machines are absolutely purpose-built to just swallow up the biggest obstacles you can put in front of them, and they're honestly not far off from something like a trophy truck. And that's not hyperbole. BJ Baldwin's trophy truck packs 26 inches of travel in the front and 30 inches of travel in the rear. Just a little bit more than what you're getting out of one of these side-by-sides. And let me remind you that something like a Specialized trophy truck, that can cost easily $500,000 all the way up to $1 million. And I think that comparison to racing really shows you just how close these side-by-sides, especially performance side-by-sides, are getting these days at matching up with the top echelon of off-road racing. If you want to make the equivalency to cars, well, just look at any top performance model. They always cost a lot of money, but they're also the closest you can get to buying a race car for the street. But the gap between today's top performance cars that you can buy from a dealership and actual purpose-built race cars is still pretty big. That gap is much bigger than buying something like a Razor Turbo S and comparing it to a trophy truck. And at the end of the day, any road-going vehicle is going to have compromises for passenger comfort and for safety. When you look at side-by-sides, these things are purpose-built off-road vehicles. They only have one thing in mind, which is climbing rocks, getting through mud, and hauling across the desert. And when you look at it that way, you can barely even compare a Jeep to a side-by-side because they both have such different conditions that they have been built to exist in. Not to mention, a stock Jeep is only just okay at going off-road, all things considered. Usually, you still have to spend thousands of dollars to upgrade a Jeep model to make sure it is truly ready for off-roading. Once again, a side-by-side comes right out of the box, ready for the roughest trail possible. And then maybe the most basic argument is just their performance. The Turbo S has the dynamic suspension so you can stiffen it up if you want really great handling, or you can go full soft if you just want to haul through some whoops and not feel them at all. There is no way that a Jeep has that kind of versatility when you get off-road. And so far I've only been talking about sport side-by-sides. If you want to look at something like the Polaris Ranger, well, these days those machines have tow ratings which are also equivalent to what you get out of a Jeep Wrangler. So even on the work side of things, side-by-sides have come so far and are so capable now. So 30 grand for a Turbo S, I know that is a pile of money. I can't afford it either. But when you get behind the wheel of one of these things, you understand that every single one of those dollars is represented in some pretty incredible engineering. Now, all that being said, do I think there's room in the market for a basic sub $10,000 sport side-by-side? Absolutely. And I think if one of these brands was smart, they would also cater to the bottom end of the market. So is 30 grand for a side-by-side worth it? I say it's worth every single penny. Of course, that's just my opinion. We want to hear what you guys think. Go down in the comments, let us know if you think I'm out of my mind or if you think these side-by-side prices are justified. Maybe you own a Polaris Turbo S. Let us know if you regret the purchase. And as always, guys, go down below, hit subscribe, and come back to TFL Off-Road for the latest news, views, and real-world reviews. I'll see ya.